No cement, no foundations. Sound waves forge solid walls from loose soil. The ground beneath an average American home carries a $4,000 secret. A secret first uncovered by German engineers in 1936, quietly used by the United States government in 1948, and then buried under 90 years of concrete dust. Because the soil under your feet already knows how to become a foundation. It just needs the right frequency. No mixer, no bags of cement, no contractor standing in the driveway, writing a 4-figure invoice. A $677 billion industry has spent nearly a century making sure homeowners never ask one simple question. What if the ground was always the answer? Welcome back to Hidden Fix Lab, the channel where buried science finally meets the people who need it most. Now, before this story goes any deeper, there is a small favor to ask. If your hands have ever held a shovel, mixed a bag of concrete, or paid a contractor more than the work seemed worth, then take one quiet second, reach down to that red subscribe button and press it like you're pressing a porch light on for a neighbor coming home after dark. It costs nothing, but it keeps this lantern burning for thousands of folks who still have no idea this knowledge exists. And while you are settling in, the team would love to know where in the world you're watching from tonight. A small town in Texas, a farmhouse in Ohio, a quiet kitchen in Manchester or Manila. Drop your city in the comments. It means more than you might think. Now, let the story begin. The story does not begin in a laboratory. It begins in the dust of a forgotten city on the banks of a river that no longer flows the way it once did. The year was 1924. A British surveyor named Rakaldas Banerjee was walking across a low mound in the Sindh region of what is now Pakistan. He carried a steel measuring rod in his hand, the kind every field archaeologist used in those days. He drove the rod into the ground out of habit, the way a man taps a wall to listen for hollow space behind it. The rod stopped. It did not sink. It did not bend. It struck something harder than the surrounding earth, and it refused to go any deeper. Banerjee bent down. He brushed away 4,000 years of dust, and he uncovered the first clean edge of a residential platform built by a people who had been forgotten by every history book then in print. The city was Mohenjo-Daro. The civilization was the Indus Valley. And the platform under his rod had been carrying the weight of houses, walls, and human lives since around 2600 BCE. That single moment, recorded in his field notes, opened a question that would haunt engineers for the next 100 years. How had a people with no concrete, no steel, no machinery, built foundations that outlasted empires? Sir John Marshall, the Director General of the Archaeological Survey of India, took over the excavation. In 1931, he published a 3-volume report titled Mohenjo-Daro and the Indus Civilization. That report still sits in university libraries across the world today. Inside it, Marshall described something his team could not at first believe. The residential platforms were not built on bedrock. They sat on loose, shifting alluvial soil, the kind of ground that should have swallowed any heavy structure within a single generation. And yet the platforms held. They held through 4,000 monsoon seasons. They held through floods, droughts, earthquakes, and the silent pressure of time itself. The method, when Marshall's team finally pieced it together, was almost embarrassingly simple. The builders of Mohenjo-Daro had compacted the earth in thin layers, beating it with heavy wooden rammers in a steady, rhythmic pattern. They were not pressing the soil. They were vibrating it. Each strike of the rammer sent a pulse of energy down through the grains of sand and silt. The particles, under that rhythm, began to slide against one another and settle into the tightest arrangement gravity would allow. The builders did not know the physics. They did not have a word for resonance. But they had something more valuable than vocabulary. They had 4,000 years of accumulated practice, passed from father to son, in a craft that simply worked. The same principle traveled westward across the centuries. Persian engineers used it to build the great walled cities of the Achaemenid period. Chinese builders used it to raise the rammed earth core of the early Great Wall, sections of which still stand today in Gansu province. And then it reached Rome. A Roman architect named Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, writing in the 1st century BCE, included a careful description of the method in his 10-volume work De Architectura. In Book 7, he wrote about a soil that, in his own words, seemed to sing under the rammer. That phrase was not poetic. Vitruvius was describing something his ear could actually hear. When the soil reached its compacted state, the sound of the rammer changed. The dull thud of loose earth became a clear, ringing note. The builders of Rome had learned to listen for it. They knew the work was finished when the ground itself began to answer back. For more than 1,000 years after Vitruvius, this knowledge remained alive in the building trades of Europe, Asia, and North Africa. Castles, granaries, port walls, and aqueduct supports were all founded on rammed earth that had been vibrated into stone-like density by human hands. Then slowly the knowledge began to fade. It did not vanish because it had failed. It did not vanish because something better had replaced it. It faded because a new material was about to enter the world stage, and that material could be manufactured, shipped, and sold in a way that compacted soil never could. But before that new material arrived, the world had already known the answer for 4,000 years. The ground beneath the human foot was never just ground. It was a foundation waiting for the right rhythm. And in 1924, when Rakaldas Banerjee's steel rod struck that buried platform in Mohenjo-Daro, the ground itself was trying to remind him of something the modern world had almost finished forgetting. For nearly 4,000 years, the rammed earth builders of the ancient world worked by feel. They knew the rhythm, they knew the sound, but they did not know why it worked. The answer to that question would not arrive until the 20th century, and when it did, it arrived in a place where almost no one was looking. A small engineering office in Germany in the autumn of 1936. Two men sat at a wooden drafting table in that office. One was a Russian-born engineer named Sergei Steuermann. The other was his colleague, Wilhelm Degen. They were studying a problem nobody else wanted to talk about publicly. Loose soil was sinking under the weight of modern ports, dams, and warehouses. The standard solution was deep concrete piling, which was slow, expensive, and only available to large industrial clients. Steuermann believed there had to be a cheaper way. He began experimenting with vibration. He took loose sand, placed it in a sealed glass tank, and shook the tank at different speeds. What he saw through the glass changed his career. At most frequencies, the sand barely moved. The grains shifted a little, then settled back into their original loose pile. But at one specific frequency, somewhere between 12 and 15 cycles per second, the sand behaved like a liquid. It flowed. It rearranged itself. And when the vibration stopped, the grains had locked into a configuration so dense that Steuermann could stand a steel rod upright in it. He had discovered, by accident, what physicists now call intergranular friction collapse. The principle was simple, but it had been hiding in plain sight for centuries. Every grain of sand or gravel is held in place by friction with the grains around it. That friction is what keeps loose soil loose. It is what allows air pockets to remain trapped between particles. When a vibration enters the soil at its natural resonant frequency, that friction temporarily drops to almost nothing. The particles slide past one another and seek the lowest energy state available to them. For any pile of irregular solid grains under gravity, the lowest energy state is the tightest possible arrangement. The air pockets collapse, the voids close, and the soil reorganizes itself into a structure that would have taken thousands of years to form naturally. Steuermann and Degen patented the technique in Germany on October 14, 1936. They called their device a vibroflot. The patent caused barely a ripple outside Germany, and the science behind it remained largely unknown in the English-speaking world for the next half-century. That changed in 1991, when a Swedish geotechnical engineer named K. Rainer Massarsch presented his findings to the international engineering community. Massarsch had spent decades documenting the technique in real-world projects across Europe, the Middle East, and North America. His paper showed that when a compaction probe was tuned precisely to the resonant frequency of the surrounding soil, the energy transfer became extraordinarily efficient. He documented compression modulus gains, which measure how much load a soil can carry without sinking further, of between 22 and 246%. Density increases between 8 and 18%. And most importantly, he proved that the effect was permanent. The compacted soil did not loosen again. The particles physically could not return to their previous arrangement without being disturbed at the same scale as the original treatment. The second major confirmation came in 2023. A team of researchers published a peer-reviewed study in Scientific Reports, a journal published by the Nature Group. The study examined granular fills treated with vibratory compaction under controlled laboratory conditions. The results were striking. Porosity reductions of 10 to 23%, cohesion increases of up to 38%, all from vibration alone, no chemical additives, no binding agents, no cement of any kind. This is where the next question becomes uncomfortable for the modern construction industry. If vibratory resonance compaction is so effective, so permanent, and so well documented in peer-reviewed literature, then why have the commercial soil stabilization products sold in hardware stores almost completely failed to replicate the result? The answer lies in the geometry of the particles themselves. Commercial products, such as polymer injections, soil hardeners, and chemical stabilizers, do not change the arrangement of the grains. They simply coat them. They glue the loose particles together at the surface level, leaving the air pockets and voids untouched beneath. Over time, those coatings break down, water seeps in, freeze-thaw cycles crack the bonds, and within 3 to 7 years, the homeowner is back at the hardware store, buying another bottle of the same product. Vibratory compaction, by contrast, removes the voids permanently. There's nothing left to break down because nothing was added in the first place. That difference is not a scientific mystery. It is just economics. A permanent solution can only be sold once. A coating that fails on schedule can be sold forever. And that, more than any other single factor, is why a principle the Indus Valley builders mastered in 2600 BCE is still missing from the average homeowner's toolbox in May of 2026. The science was settled. The patents were filed. The German engineers had done their work, and the principle was no longer hiding in any laboratory. By the late 1940s, vibratory compaction had even crossed the Atlantic. In 1948, the United States Bureau of Reclamation used vibratory probes on the foundation zone of the Indus Dam in Nebraska. The technical reports from that project are still archived in federal records today. The method worked, the soil held, the dam stood. And for a brief window of time, it looked as though the ancient principle was about to enter the modern American building trades through the front door. Then, 1952 arrived. That year, an industry trade group called the Portland Cement Association, headquartered in Chicago, launched one of the most ambitious educational campaigns in American construction history. Its slogan was simple and easy to remember: concrete is permanent. The campaign was not aimed at engineers. It was aimed at the next generation of builders before they ever stepped onto a job site. By 1955, the Portland Cement Association had distributed teaching materials to more than 400 vocational schools and trade programs across the United States. Foundation courses for young carpenters, masons, and small contractors were rewritten around a single default answer to every ground problem: pour concrete. Vibratory compaction was not banned. It was not discredited. It was simply left out of the curriculum. A generation of American builders graduated from those programs without ever hearing the word resonance. They learned to estimate concrete by the cubic yard. They learned to read slump tests and rebar schedules. But the principle that the Indus Valley had mastered 4,000 years earlier had quietly disappeared from their education. By 1958, the residential building code references in 23 American states had removed vibratory ground improvement from their recommended methods list for small structures. The phrase used in most code revisions was not aggressive. It was bureaucratic. The method was simply marked as not standardized for residential application. That single phrase did more damage than any ban could have done. It made the technique invisible to permit offices, to insurance underwriters, and to every contractor who needed signed approval to do his work. Meanwhile, the cement industry kept growing. According to current market data, the global cement and concrete sector now generates over $677 billion in annual revenue. In the United States alone, residential foundation work accounts for more than $14 billion of that figure every year. A typical concrete foundation for a small shed, garage, or detached deck costs an American homeowner between $1,200 and $4,000. That same job, done with vibratory compaction and crushed aggregate, costs roughly $200 in materials and 1 day of equipment rental. The math is not subtle. It is just economics. And economics, more than any sinister plot, is what has kept this knowledge buried in plain sight for almost 90 years. One man tried to bring it back. His name was Dr. Robert D. Holtz. He served as a professor of civil and environmental engineering at the University of Washington for more than 3 decades, and he is now professor emeritus at that institution. In 1981, Dr. Holtz co-authored a textbook titled An Introduction to Geotechnical Engineering. The book is still used in graduate engineering programs across the world today. Inside that textbook, in a chapter on ground improvement techniques, Dr. Holtz devoted careful, sober pages to vibratory compaction. He cited the European projects. He cited the density data. He explained the physics and language that any working engineer could understand. The textbook was widely adopted at the university level, but the residential construction trade, which is governed by local codes and trained through vocational programs, never adopted the chapter. Dr. Holtz did not give interviews accusing anyone of suppression. He did not appear on talk shows. He simply published the science year after year and waited for the building trades to catch up. They did not catch up. In a 2008 conference paper, Dr. Holtz noted in his calm academic prose that the gap between geotechnical research and residential construction practice in North America had widened, not narrowed, over the previous 50 years. He did not call it a cover-up. He called it a market failure. That phrase deserves to be repeated. A market failure. A solution that cannot be sold is a solution that cannot be marketed. A method that requires only rented equipment and existing soil generates no recurring revenue, no warranty contracts, no replacement cycles, and no national supply chain. A bag of Portland cement, by contrast, generates revenue every time it is purchased, mixed, poured, and eventually replaced. The cement industry did not need to silence the science. It only needed to outspend it on education, on advertising, and on the quiet work of writing the standards that local building offices later adopted. That is not conspiracy. That is just economics. And the bill for that economics has been quietly paid, one foundation at a time, by American homeowners for nearly a century. The science is real. The history is documented. The economics are clear. What remains is the only question that actually matters to a homeowner standing in his own backyard. How was it done? The answer is simpler than the industry has ever wanted it to sound. A working man with rented equipment in a single afternoon can do what a contractor would charge $4,000 to do with a concrete truck. The story of how that works is best told through the example of one real person who actually did it. His name is Daniel Whitmore. He is a retired electrician living in Bend, Oregon. In the spring of 2022, he decided to build a 12 by 16 foot workshop in his backyard. The first contractor he called gave him a quote for a poured concrete slab. The number on the bottom of that quote was $3,840. Daniel asked for a second quote, and the second number came in slightly higher. He did not have that money to spend, so he did what most people in his generation were taught to do. He went to the local library, sat down with the geotechnical engineering reference books, and read until he understood the alternative. What he learned next is what every homeowner watching this video can learn today. The first step is to identify the soil. Vibratory compaction works most powerfully on granular soils. Sand, gravel, crushed aggregate, and sandy loam are the target materials. Heavy clay soils and organic topsoil are not suitable, and any builder who tries the method on the wrong soil will be disappointed. A simple field test settles the question. A handful of soil, squeezed in the palm and then released, should crumble apart rather than hold its shape. If it crumbles, the method will work. The second step is the equipment. A reversible plate compactor rated at 4,000 to 5,000 pounds of centrifugal force is the standard tool. Every major equipment rental company in the United States carries them. The daily rental cost runs between $60 and $100. Daniel rented his machine for a single day. The bill came to $74. The third step is surface preparation. The treatment area must be cleared of vegetation, roots, and any organic debris. The plate of the machine must make direct contact with the mineral soil beneath. If the soil is bone dry, a moderate watering brings the moisture content into the 10 to 15% range, which improves particle rearrangement significantly. Daniel marked out his 12 by 16 foot pad with stakes and string. He removed the top 2 inches of sod and watered the exposed soil lightly. The fourth step is the first pass. The machine moves slowly across the treatment zone, no faster than 30 feet per minute, in parallel strips. Each pass effectively compacts about 1 inch of soil depth per 1,000 pounds of centrifugal force the machine generates. A 4,000-pound machine works the top 4 inches of soil on a single pass. For deeper treatment, the work is done in 6-inch lifts, with multiple passes before the next layer of aggregate is added. The fifth step is the cross pass. The machine moves perpendicular to the direction of the first pass. This catches any gaps in energy transfer and ensures even coverage across the entire pad. Daniel made his 2 passes in just under 2 hours. He watched the surface change beneath his feet from soft and yielding to firm and resistant. The 6th step is the aggregate layer. 6 to 8 inches of 3/4 inch angular crushed gravel is spread evenly across the compacted native soil. Angular gravel interlocks far more effectively than smooth riverstone when compacted, creating a bearing surface with dramatically higher load capacity than either material alone. Daniel bought his gravel from a local quarry south of Bend. The total cost for his pad was $137 in materials. The 7th step is the final compaction. The aggregate layer is compacted with the same machine, using the same 2-pass cross pattern. When the work is finished, the surface no longer shifts under boot pressure. It rings slightly under the heel, just as Vitruvius described 2,000 years ago. Daniel finished his pad on a Saturday evening in April of 2022. His total cost was $211. His workshop has stood on that pad through 4 Oregon winters without measurable settlement. The contractor's quote, refused that morning, would have cost him 18 times more. That comparison is not a marketing claim. It is a receipt, signed by a real man in a real town, in a country where the average homeowner has been quietly paying the price of forgotten knowledge for almost a century. The ground was never the problem. The invoice was. And now, thanks to the work of ancient builders, German engineers, Swedish scientists, and 1 retired electrician in Oregon, that invoice no longer has to be paid. The frequency was always free. The rhythm was always free. And the foundation, as the Indus Valley knew 4,000 years ago, was always waiting beneath the feet of anyone willing to listen.